My name is Camille Johnson. I'm 39 years old, and I live in Brooklyn, New York. It feels strange to start like this, introducing myself as if I were meeting someone for the first time, but maybe that's what this is, a proper introduction, because for most of my life, I've carried this quiet feeling of being on the outside looking in, even when the people in front of me were supposed to be my family. I was born and raised in Queens. My mother was a nurse, working long shifts at the hospital, and my father drove a city bus. They were proud people, hard workers, and they did everything they could to give me stability. But unlike some of my cousins, I didn't grow up with privilege or the polished life of private schools and summer trips. My parents lived paycheck to paycheck, and though they loved me fiercely, I always felt the subtle distance when we'd gather at family events. It wasn't just about money, it was about class, perception, and if I'm honest, the shade of my skin compared to some of my lighter-skinned relatives. No one said it directly, but you don't need words when you can feel something in the air. By the time I hit my mid-30s, I had built a good life for myself. I wasn't rich, but I worked as a project manager at a construction firm, steady and reliable. I had my own apartment, paid my bills, and carried myself with dignity. I thought maybe that would be enough to finally be seen as equal. When my cousin Angela announced her wedding, I took it as an opportunity to reconnect. Angela and I grew up together, though together might be too strong of a word. We were in the same rooms at the same parties, but our lives never really intertwined. She went off to private school, then college in Boston, while I stayed local and helped my parents when money was tight. Still, when the wedding invitation arrived in the mail on thick, cream-colored paper with gold lettering, I felt a flicker of excitement. The card read, "We are thrilled to invite you to celebrate the union of Angela Marie Carter and David Alexander Lewis. Join us for a night of joy, love, and family." That word family stood out to me. I told myself maybe this time it would be true. I spent weeks preparing. I bought a new dress, navy blue with a flattering cut that hugged my curves without being too bold. I booked a hair appointment and had my curls styled into a soft updo. And the gift, I agonized over it. Angela had registered at high-end stores with items that cost more than my monthly rent. I couldn't afford the grand gestures, but I decided to save up for something meaningful. I chose a set of crystal wine glasses, elegant and timeless, with a handwritten note wishing them love and prosperity. It wasn't the most expensive thing on the registry, but it wasn't cheap either. I told myself it showed thought, effort, and care. The wedding itself was beautiful, no doubt about it. It was held at an upscale hotel in Manhattan, the kind of place with marble floors, chandeliers, and valet parking. I arrived early, clutching my gift, my heels clicking nervously against the polished floor as I walked toward the reception hall. Everyone looked glamorous, dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits. For a moment, I wondered if I belonged there at all. During the ceremony, I sat quietly, watching Angela in her white gown walk down the aisle with a grace I had to admit was stunning. David looked at her like she was the only person in the room. People dabbed their eyes, cameras flashed, and for a brief while, I let myself feel swept up in the romance of it all. But the reception, that was where everything shifted. I found my seat at a round table in the back corner, next to distant relatives I hadn't seen in years. I smiled politely, made small talk, and tried to blend in. When the music started, and people began dancing, I stayed seated for a while, sipping my drink and watching. I didn't mind. I was happy enough just to be there. It wasn't until I went to greet Angela that the sting began. She was surrounded by bridesmaids laughing, posing for photos. I waited my turn, then stepped forward with a smile. "Angela, you look beautiful," I said softly, meaning it. She glanced at me, her smile flickering for a second before she said, "Oh, hi, Camille. Thanks for coming." Her voice carried that polite tone you reserve for acquaintances, not family. Before I could say more, someone else called her name, and she turned away. I brushed it off. Maybe she was just overwhelmed, busy with the crowd. But as the night went on, the coldness grew more obvious. At one point, I tried to join a group of relatives chatting near the bar. When I approached, the conversation died down, and one of them, a cousin I hadn't seen since childhood, looked at me with a faint smile and said, "Oh, you're here? I didn't realize Angela invited everyone." The word hung in the air, everyone, like I was a stranger who had wandered in. I forced a laugh. "Well, she did," I replied lightly, but my stomach twisted. Later, as the dinner plates were cleared and the dance floor filled, I overheard the words that would carve themselves into my memory. I had gone to place my gift on the designated table, arranging it carefully among the pile of wrapped boxes and shiny bags. Two women I vaguely recognized as Angela's friends were standing nearby. "Who's that?" one whispered. "Oh, that's Camille," another answered. "She's, not really family." The first woman laughed softly. "Figures. Doesn't really fit in here." I froze, my hand still on the ribbon of the gift. "Not family." The words pierced deeper than I expected. I wanted to scream, to demand why I had been invited if that's how they saw me. But instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat and stepped away. For the rest of the evening, I drifted on the edges unseen. The laughter, the toasts, the hugs, they weren't for me. By the time dessert was served, I felt like a ghost haunting a party that had never been meant for me. It was then, while standing near the back exit, that I noticed the janitor. He was an older man, maybe in his 60s, dressed in a simple uniform. He moved quietly, pushing a cart, sweeping up crumbs, emptying trash bins. No one paid him any attention, but I did, because in that moment, I recognized something in him, the invisibility, the way you can be in a room full of people and still not exist in their eyes. I glanced at the gift table again, at the crystal glasses wrapped so neatly. A thought sparked in my mind, sharp and sudden. Why should they have it? Why should I give anything more of myself to people who didn't even acknowledge me as one of their own? I picked up the gift, walked over to the janitor, and held it out. He looked at me startled. "What's this?" he asked, his voice carrying years of hard work and exhaustion. "A wedding present," I said simply. He frowned, confused. "Ma'am, I think you got the wrong person." "No," I replied, my voice steady. "I've got the right one." For the first time that evening, I felt in control. The humiliation, the rejection, it no longer sat on my chest like a weight. Instead, I felt lighter, almost free. Because in giving away that gift, I was also giving away their power to make me feel small. And that's where it all began. I left the hotel that night with my head held higher than I expected. The air outside was cool, the kind of crisp Manhattan breeze that carries both the smell of the Hudson and the faint trace of street food vendors still serving late-night customers. My heels clicked against the pavement as I walked toward the subway, my dress still elegant, my hair still intact, but something inside me had shifted. I replayed the evening in my mind, Angela's distracted glance, the cousin's cutting remark, the whisper of "not really family." But instead of feeling the same sting, I thought about the look on the janitor's face when I placed the box of crystal glasses in his hands. His eyes had widened, not with greed but with disbelief, as if no one had ever handed him something with such care. I didn't know his name, didn't know his story, but for those few seconds, he had seen me, and I had seen him. That meant more than any shallow toast inside that ballroom. When I got home to my Brooklyn apartment, I slipped off my heels and sat on the couch, staring at the city lights through my window. I could have cried, but I didn't. Instead, I felt this strange mix of sadness and liberation. Maybe, I thought, family wasn't about shared bloodlines or being written into guest lists. Maybe it was about mutual recognition, about giving and receiving respect. The next morning, I woke up with a dull ache in my chest. Sundays were usually my quiet days, reserved for grocery shopping, laundry, and catching up on bills. But that morning, I couldn't shake the image of the janitor. I wondered if he had kept the gift, if he'd opened it when he got home, if his wife or children or maybe grandchildren had asked where it came from. I almost laughed at myself. What business was it of mine? I had handed it over. That should have been the end of it. But something tugged at me, a curiosity I couldn't ignore. 2 days later, during my lunch break, I decided to call the hotel. I hesitated at first, pacing with my phone in hand. What if they thought I was crazy? Still, I dialed. "Good afternoon, Westbrook Plaza Hotel," the receptionist answered, her voice polished. "Hi, I began carefully. I was at a wedding there on Saturday, and I wanted to know if you could help me with something. She asked for details, and I explained lightly, leaving out the humiliation part that I had given a gift to one of the staff members, an older janitor, and I wanted to make sure he was allowed to keep it. There was a pause. "Do you mean Mr. Harris?" she asked. I don't know his name, I admitted. If he's the gentleman on the cleaning staff during events, that would be James Harris. He's been with us for nearly 20 years. Something about hearing his name, James Harris, made him real to me in a way he hadn't been before. I just wanted to be sure he wasn't going to get in trouble for accepting it, I said. The receptionist's tone softened. "Oh, don't worry. Mr. Harris mentioned it. He was very touched. He even said it was the nicest thing anyone had ever given him." My throat tightened. I thanked her and hung up, but the words lingered. The nicest thing anyone had ever given him. All day, I thought about James Harris. I imagined him sitting in a modest apartment somewhere, unwrapping the crystal glasses with care. Maybe he poured himself a drink in one, holding it up to the light like it was made of diamonds. Maybe he tucked them away safely, too precious to use. That evening, I told myself to let it go, but deep down, I knew I wouldn't. The next weekend, I did something impulsive. I went back to the Westbrook Plaza Hotel. I wasn't sure if I would see him, but I felt compelled to try. I dressed casually, jeans, a sweater, sneakers so I wouldn't stand out too much. When I walked through the revolving doors, the lobby was buzzing with guests checking in and out. I approached the front desk, nerves fluttering in my stomach. "Excuse me," I said. "I was wondering if Mr. Harris is working today?" The young man behind the desk looked up. "Mr. Harris? Oh, you mean James?" "Yes, ma'am. He's on shift in the banquet hall. Should I let him know someone's here to see him?" I nodded quickly. "Please." A few minutes later, I saw him coming down the hallway, pushing his cart. He looked exactly as I remembered, tall but slightly hunched, with kind eyes that seemed tired yet alert. When he spotted me, his face registered surprise. "Well, I'll be," he said, stopping a few feet away. "You're the lady from the wedding," I smiled nervously. "Yes, Camille." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Camille, you didn't have to come all the way here just for me." "I wanted to," I admitted. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay. That she didn't get in trouble for the gift." James waved a hand. "Trouble? Nah, they don't pay me enough to care about fancy glasses, but they did let me keep them. My wife, Lorraine, she just about cried when I brought him home. Said she never thought we'd own something so nice." His words hit me harder than I expected. I swallowed, trying not to let my emotions show. "I'm glad," I said softly. James studied me for a moment, his brow furrowed. "But tell me, Camille, why'd you give it to me? That was meant for your people, wasn't it?" I hesitated. How could I explain without unraveling the whole painful story? I settled on the truth. Simple and direct. "Because they didn't see me as family. But in that moment, you did, and that mattered." For a long second, he didn't say anything. Then he nodded slowly. "I get it, more than you know." We ended up talking for nearly half an hour, standing there in the hallway while hotel guests bustled past. James told me about his life, how he'd worked at the hotel since his late 40s, how he and Lorraine had raised 3 kids who were all grown now, scattered across the country. He didn't complain, but I could hear the quiet weariness in his words, the way decades of hard work had carved lines into his face. When it was time for him to get back to his shift, he extended his hand. "You ever want to talk again? You know where to find me." I shook his hand, feeling a warmth that surprised me. "I'll take you up on that." As I left the hotel, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't thinking about Angela anymore. I wasn't replaying the hurt or the whispers. Instead, my mind was on James Harris and his wife Lorraine, and the way their joy over a set of crystal glasses had somehow given me back a piece of myself. That night, lying in bed, I thought about how strange life can be. Sometimes the people who should care for you the most are the ones who wound you deepest. And sometimes a stranger sweeping crumbs off a ballroom floor can show you more kindness than your own blood. For the first time in years, I felt the beginning of something new, like maybe I was on the edge of rewriting what family meant to me. And James Harris was just the beginning. The following week at work, My mind kept wandering. I was supposed to be focused on project schedules, deadlines, and budget approvals, but between meetings and emails, I kept replaying my conversation with James Harris. Something about his presence lingered with me, the steadiness in his voice, the way he spoke about his wife Lorraine, the quiet dignity he carried even in his janitor's uniform. By Wednesday afternoon, I caught myself staring at my computer screen without actually reading anything. I sighed, closed my laptop, and leaned back in my chair. One of my coworkers, Jenna, popped her head over the cubicle wall. "You okay, Camille?" she asked, her tone concerned. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired. Long week." She nodded sympathetically before going back to her work. But I wasn't tired. I was restless. That Friday evening, instead of heading straight home, I found myself on the subway toward Midtown. My heart thudded with nervous energy as the train rattled through the tunnels. I didn't even know if James would be working, but something pulled me there. I wanted to see him again, to continue the conversation we had started. When I arrived at the hotel, the lobby was buzzing with guests in evening attire. I scanned the room, uncertain, until I spotted James at the far end, adjusting table settings in preparation for what looked like another wedding reception. "Mr. Harris," I called softly as I approached. He looked up, and a grin spread across his face. "Camille, well? I'll be back again already?" I laughed nervously. "I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to say hello." He set down the stack of napkins he was arranging and wiped his hands on his uniform. "Not intruding at all. You just caught me in the middle of setting up. These folks pay for fancy decorations, but half the time they don't notice them once the drinks start flowing." We both chuckled, and I felt myself relax. "Do you have a break soon?" I asked. "Maybe I could buy you a coffee?" James raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. "Well, now, nobody's offered me that in a long while." "Sure." I got 15 minutes. We walked to a small cafe across the street, tucked away between a pharmacy and a bookstore. It wasn't glamorous, but it was warm and quiet. The kind of place where you could actually hear yourself think. James ordered tea, while I got my usual black coffee. We sat at a corner table, and for a while, I just studied him. The lines in his face, the way his hands curled around the cup like he was savoring the warmth. "So, Camille," he said, his eyes steady on mine. "Tell me something. What made you come back here?" I hesitated. Honesty had never been my problem, but vulnerability, that was harder. Still, something about James made me want to be open. "I guess I felt drawn," I admitted. "That night at the wedding, when I gave you the gift, I didn't realize how much I needed someone to see me. To really see me. And you did." "I think I wanted to feel that again." James nodded slowly, taking a sip of his tea. "I understand. Sometimes we walk around invisible, even to the ones closest to us. But I'll tell you this, being seen by the right person, even for a moment, can make all the difference." His words hit me deep, and I felt my throat tighten. I looked down at my cup, blinking back the emotion that threatened to spill over. "What about you?" I asked quickly, needing to shift the focus. "Tell me about Lorraine. You mentioned her before." James's face softened instantly, his entire expression changing. "Oh, Lorraine. Been married to that woman for 40 years. Met her at church when we were both teenagers. She's the strongest person I know. Keeps me grounded, even when life tries to knock us off our feet." He spoke with such reverence that I couldn't help but smile. 40 years. That's rare these days, rare. But worth it, he said firmly. "She stood by me through layoffs, sickness, all kinds of storms. We didn't have much, but we had each other. That was enough." I felt a pang of envy, though I masked it with another smile. I had never been married. Never even come close. Relationships for me had always been complicated men who couldn't handle my independence, who thought my worth was measured by how much I needed them. I had long since stopped searching, convincing myself I was better off alone. But hearing James speak about Lorraine made me wonder if maybe I had missed out on something more profound than I realized. After we finished our drinks, James glanced at the clock and stood up. "I better get back before they send out a search party," he joked. I stood as well. "Thank you for sharing with me, James. Really." He gave me a warm smile. "Anytime, Camille. Don't be a stranger." As I walked back toward the subway, I felt lighter. Talking to James was like peeling back layers I hadn't touched in years, layers of loneliness I had buried under work and routine. He wasn't just a janitor. He was a reminder that human connection could be simple and real, if only you let it. The following week, I went back again, and again the week after that. Each time, James welcomed me with the same warmth, as if he had been expecting me all along. Sometimes we shared coffee, other times, we just stood in the hallway, talking while he worked. He told me stories about his children, one son in Atlanta, a daughter in Chicago, another son who had joined the military. His pride was clear, even as he admitted they didn't call as often as he wished. In return, I shared pieces of myself I rarely told anyone. I told him about my parents, both gone now, about how I had struggled to feel accepted among relatives who judged me quietly but harshly. I even admitted my fears that maybe I had wasted too much time waiting for people to treat me with love that would never come. James listened without judgment, his gaze steady, his silence never empty. Sometimes he would offer a word of wisdom, other times just a nod that told me he understood. One evening, as I was leaving the hotel, he said something that stayed with me. "Camille," he said, leaning slightly on his cart, "don't spend your life waiting at doors that were never meant to open for you. Find the doors that do open, and walk through those." His words echoed in my head long after I got home. That night, lying in bed, I realized how much James Harris had become a part of my days. What started as a single act of defiance giving him that wedding gift had turned into something else entirely. A friendship, a lifeline. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I wasn't invisible anymore. By the time a month had passed, visiting James had become a quiet routine I looked forward to. Every Friday after work, instead of heading home to my empty apartment, I found myself taking the train into Midtown, stopping by the Westbrook Plaza Hotel. Sometimes it was just a quick chat in the hallway, sometimes a coffee across the street, and once, he even introduced me to a few of his coworkers who looked at him with genuine respect. It felt strange, this comfort I had found with him. At first, I worried I might be intruding on his life, but James never made me feel that way. Each time I appeared, his face lit up with that steady smile, and each time I left, I carried his words with me like a lantern in the dark. One particular Friday, I arrived just as another wedding was beginning. The lobby was filled with laughter, expensive dresses, and bouquets of flowers. I almost turned back, the memories of Angela's wedding threatening to crash down on me, but then I spotted James wheeling his cart out of the ballroom. "Well, look who it is," he said, chuckling. "Thought maybe you'd grown tired of old janitors." "Not a chance," I replied with a grin. We slipped into our usual rhythm, walking to the cafe for tea and coffee. That evening, the air outside was cold, a hint of snow in the wind. Inside the cafe, though, it was warm, the windows fogged slightly from the heat. We sat in our usual corner, and for a moment, I just looked at him, realizing how natural this had become. "I keep thinking about what you said," I told him after a pause, "about doors not meant to open for me." It hit me harder than I expected. James stirred his tea slowly. "Because it's true. Too many people waste their years banging on doors that ain't theirs. You deserve better than that." I swallowed, staring down at my cup. "The thing is, I don't even know what my door is anymore. I thought family was supposed to be it." But after Angela's wedding, my voice trailed off. James leaned back, studying me. "Family is who shows up, Camille, not who shares your blood. Remember that." His words stayed with me, even as we drifted into lighter conversation. We laughed about small things, the way hotel guests left the messiest rooms, how construction sites and banquet halls both had their own kind of chaos. But beneath it all, I felt something shifting inside me. That night, when I got home, I stared at the crystal vase on my shelf, the one gift I had kept for myself when shopping for Angela. I had originally thought about giving it too, but something told me to hold on to it. Now, as I traced the delicate ridges with my fingers, I thought of Lorraine. I imagined her smile when she saw those glasses, and I realized I wanted to meet her. The next week, when James and I sat in the cafe again, I finally asked. Would it be all right if I met Lorraine someday? James's eyes widened slightly, then softened. She'd like that. Lord knows she gets tired of hearing me ramble about my new friend from Brooklyn. I laughed, a little embarrassed. You've mentioned me? Of course I have. She says it sounds like you've been good company for me. And she's right. That following Sunday, I took the train out to Harlem, where James and Lorraine lived in a modest brick apartment building. The neighborhood buzzed with live kids playing on the sidewalks, music spilling from open windows, the scent of fried chicken and collard greens drifting from small restaurants. James greeted me at the door, wearing a neatly pressed shirt instead of his uniform. Come on in, Camille, he said warmly. Inside, the apartment was cozy, filled with the smell of something baking. Family photos lined the walls, graduations, weddings, holiday gatherings. Lorraine emerged from the kitchen, a petite woman with kind eyes and a presence that radiated warmth. So this is Camille, she said, wiping her hands on a towel. James has told me all about you. I smiled nervously. All good things, I hope. Lorraine laughed. The best things. Come sit. I made peach cobbler. The three of us sat around their small dining table, plates of cobbler in front of us. It was sweet and warm, comforting in a way that reminded me of my own mother's cooking. As we ate, Lorraine asked me about my job, my life in Brooklyn, and I found myself answering easily, as though I had known her for years. At one point, James leaned back, watching us with a smile. See? Told you she was good people. Lorraine reached over and patted my hand. You're welcome here anytime, Camille. Family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choice. Her words filled a space inside me I hadn't realized was so empty. As the evening went on, we laughed and shared stories. Lorraine told me about raising their kids while James worked long hours at the hotel, about how they made do with what little they had. She spoke with such pride and resilience that I felt humbled. When it was time to leave, Lorraine hugged me tightly, as if I were already part of their circle. On the train ride home, I stared out the window, my reflection blending with the city lights. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt chosen. Over the next few weeks, I visited them often. Sometimes we cooked dinner together. Sometimes we just sat and talked. Each time, I felt the weight of loneliness lift a little more. Angela and the others no longer haunted my thoughts. Instead, I thought of Lorraine's laughter, James's steady wisdom, and the way their home smelled of baked goods and warmth. One evening, as we finished dinner, James raised his glass. To unexpected family, he said simply. I clinked my glass against theirs, my throat tight with emotion. To unexpected family, I echoed, and I knew then that I had found mine. By the time spring rolled in, my Friday visits to Harlem had become a ritual. Work ended, I'd grab a bottle of wine or a bag of groceries, and I'd head straight to James and Lorraine's apartment. They'd greet me like I was coming home, not just visiting. Lorraine would pull me into a hug that smelled faintly of cocoa butter and vanilla, and James would grin like he'd been waiting all week just to share stories with me. It felt safe. That's the best way I can describe it. Safe in a way I hadn't felt in years. One Friday evening, Lorraine and I were in the kitchen together, chopping vegetables for dinner. She worked with practiced ease, humming softly while she moved around the stove. I found myself watching her hands, steady and confident, and I couldn't help blurting out, "You make it look so easy." Lorraine chuckled. That's 40 years of practice, baby. Cooking, keeping a house, keeping James in line, she winked playfully. You pick up a few tricks along the way. From the living room, James called out. I heard that. We both laughed. As we cooked, Lorraine glanced at me, her expression softening. Can I tell you something, Camille? Of course, I said. When James told me about the wedding, the gift, I knew right away you were someone special. Not many people would have done what you did. You could have walked out angry, bitter. But instead, you gave kindness. That says a lot about your spirit. Her words caught me off guard. I lowered my knife, suddenly blinking back tears. I don't know if it was kindness or just desperation. I didn't want to leave there empty, invisible. Giving him that gift, it gave me back some dignity. Lorraine reached across the counter and squeezed my hand. And that's exactly why it meant so much. Because it came from your heart. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. That night, after dinner, James pulled out an old photo album. He and Lorraine sat side by side on the couch while I perched on the armrest, leaning over their shoulders as they flipped through the pages. "Here's our oldest, Marcus," James said, pointing to a graduation photo. "Smart as a whip. Works down in Atlanta now." "This one's Denise," Lorraine added, tapping a picture of a smiling young woman in a cap and gown. "She's got her own little family in Chicago. 2 beautiful kids. And here's our baby," James said, his voice proud. "Caleb. He joined the army right after high school." I studied each photo, noticing the love and pride radiating from both of them. But I also noticed the way their smiles dimmed ever so slightly when they spoke of how far their children lived, how rarely they visited. "They call when they can," Lorraine said softly, as if to reassure herself. "Life keeps them busy." I nodded, sensing the unspoken ache beneath her words. When I finally left that evening, Lorraine hugged me a little longer than usual. "You're good company, Camille," she said. "Don't forget that." On the train ride home, I thought about her words. For so long, I had measured my worth by how my relatives saw me or didn't. But here were James and Lorraine, 2 people who owed me nothing, reminding me that I was enough just as I was. The next week, something unexpected happened. At work, Jenna invited me to a co-worker's birthday dinner. Normally, I would have gone just to avoid seeming antisocial, but this time, I politely declined. Instead, I went straight to Harlem. When I knocked on the Harris's door, Lorraine opened it with a grin. "Well, look at you. Showing up without calling first. You must know your family now." Her words warmed me in a way I can't explain. That evening, as we ate dinner, I told them about Angela's wedding in more detail. I hadn't shared the full story before, just the bare bones. But that night, I let it spill out, the whispers, the looks, the humiliation. James listened quietly, his jaw tightening, while Lorraine shook her head in disapproval. "They don't deserve you, Camille," Lorraine said firmly. "And they sure don't define you. People like that, they're blind. They can't see past their own pride." James leaned forward, his voice steady. "Let me tell you something my daddy used to say. Blood might make you related, but loyalty makes you family. You gave them loyalty, Camille, and they threw it back at you. Don't waste another ounce of yourself on them." Hearing him say that, I felt something inside me loosen, like a knot finally untying. Over the following weeks, I started to notice changes in myself. At work, I carried myself with more confidence. I stopped trying to overcompensate in conversations, stopped worrying so much about being accepted. When I walked into a room, I no longer felt like a shadow. One afternoon, Jenna remarked, "You've been different lately, Camille. Happier. What's your secret?" I smiled and simply said, "I stopped chasing the wrong people." She raised an eyebrow but didn't press. It wasn't until late April that Angela called me. Seeing her name on my phone screen startled me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. "Hello," I said cautiously. "Camille," she began, her tone clipped but polite. "I wanted to thank you for attending the wedding. And for the gift." My stomach tightened. "The gift?" "Yes," she continued, "though, honestly, I don't recall seeing it after the reception. Maybe it got misplaced." I hesitated, my heart pounding. Then I said calmly, "It didn't get misplaced. I gave it to someone else." There was a pause. "Someone else?" she repeated, confused. "Yes, to a man who deserved it more than you did." Her silence on the other end was heavy. Finally, she scoffed. "Well, that's unusual. Maybe," I said firmly. "But it was the right choice." I ended the call before she could respond. My hands shook as I set the phone down, but I felt no regret. For the first time in my life, I had drawn a line with her, with all of them. That evening, when I told James and Lorraine about the call, James chuckled. "Bet she didn't see that coming." Lorraine shook her head, smiling. "Good for you, Camille. About time you stood your ground." We raised our glasses at dinner that night, and Lorraine said softly, "To choosing ourselves," and for the first time, I realized I had. The warmth of spring soon gave way to the heavy, humid days of early summer. By then, The Harrises weren't just people I visited on Fridays, they were woven into my weeks like threads in a quilt. If I skipped a visit, Lorraine would call me just to check in, and James would tease me the next time we met. "What? You forget about us already?" I hadn't forgotten. In fact, I found myself craving their company more than anything else in my life. Work was fine, stable, but it felt flat compared to the evenings I spent in Harlem. One Friday, I arrived with a bag of groceries. Lorraine had mentioned she was tired from a long week, so I decided to cook for them. "You didn't have to do that," Lorraine said as I unloaded vegetables, chicken, and rice onto her counter. "I wanted to," I replied. "Besides, you always feed me. Tonight it's my turn." She smiled, clearly touched. "All right, chef, show me what you've got." Cooking in their kitchen felt surprisingly natural. Lorraine hovered nearby, offering tips but letting me take the lead. James sat at the table, pretending to supervise while sneaking bites of the carrot sticks I had chopped. "Don't think I don't see you," I teased him. He grinned, his mouth full. Quality control. The three of us laughed, and in that moment, I realized how easy it had become to feel at home with them. Over dinner, conversation flowed as usual, but then Lorraine asked a question that made me pause. "Camille, do you ever see much of your family anymore?" I set my fork down, considering my answer. "Not really," I admitted. After the wedding, I think I finally accepted that I don't belong there. And honestly, I don't miss it as much as I thought I would. Lorraine reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Good. Some TIs are worth cutting if they choke you more than they hold you." James nodded in agreement. "And you've got family here now. That's what matters." His words settled over me like a blanket. As the weeks went on, I began noticing small changes in the Harrises too. James seemed lighter, less weary. Lorraine's laughter rang louder during our evenings together. One night, as we played a game of dominoes, Lorraine leaned toward me and whispered, "You've been good for him, you know. He's happier these days." I glanced at James, who was focused on his tiles, and smiled softly. "He's been good for me too, but life, as always, had its way of testing happiness." One sweltering evening in June, I arrived at the apartment to find James sitting quietly on the couch, his posture slumped, his usual smile absent. Lorraine hovered nearby, her expression tense. "What's wrong?" I asked immediately. James sighed, rubbing his temples. "Doctor says my blood pressure's too high. Wants me to slow down at work." "But how am I supposed to slow down? Bills don't slow down." Lorraine frowned, crossing her arms. "I've been telling him for years to cut back his hours, but he's stubborn." James gave her a look but didn't argue. Instead, he turned to me. "You ever feel like you're running just to stay in the same place?" I sat beside him, my heart aching. "All the time. But maybe this is the universe telling you it's time to rest. You've worked hard your whole life, James. Maybe you deserve a break." He chuckled dryly. "Rest doesn't pay rent." We fell into a heavy silence. For the first time since meeting James, I felt the weight of his years pressing down, the toll of decades spent taking care of everyone else. That night, after I got home, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about James and Lorraine, about their sacrifices, about how unfair it felt that rest came at such a cost. I thought about the crystal glasses still shimmering in their cabinet, and how much joy something small had brought them. Maybe there was more I could do. The next day, I started looking into resources, community programs, senior benefits, anything that might help. It wasn't much, but it was something. When I shared what I'd found the following week, James looked at me with surprise. "You didn't have to go through all that trouble, Camille." "Yes, I did," I insisted. "Because you'd do the same for me." He stared at me for a long moment before finally nodding. "You're right, I would." Lorraine smiled, her eyes shining. "See, James? You've got someone else stubborn enough to look after you now." That evening, we sat together on the balcony, the warm air buzzing with the sounds of the city below. James sipped iced tea, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said slowly, "when I first saw you at that wedding, I thought you looked like someone carrying a heavy load. Didn't expect you'd end up lightening mine." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "And I didn't expect a janitor with a broom would change my life. But here we are." We shared a quiet laugh. and for a moment, everything felt still, as if the world had paused to give us space. As the night wore on, Lorraine dozed off in her chair, and James and I sat in comfortable silence. I realized then that family isn't always about big gestures or perfect moments. Sometimes it's about simply sitting beside someone, sharing the weight of life without needing to fill the silence. But deep inside, I knew challenges were ahead. James's health, their financial worries, these weren't things I could fix overnight. Still, I also knew this. I wasn't going anywhere. Not now. Not ever. Because they weren't just the people I visited on Fridays. They were my people, and I was theirs. The summer heat grew heavier with each passing week, the kind that sticks to your skin even at night. I had started keeping extra clothes at the Harris's apartment, since some evenings stretched late into the night and Lorraine insisted I stay over rather than travel back to Brooklyn so late. At first, I hesitated, worried about overstaying my welcome, but Lorraine waved that off quickly. "Camille," she said one night as she handed me a folded blanket, "you're not a guest anymore. You're family. Stop asking permission." Her words settled into my chest like an anchor. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear them until that moment. But while our bond grew deeper, James's health continued to weigh on us all. He tried to hide it, but the fatigue was obvious. His steps were slower, his shoulders heavier. One evening after dinner, I noticed him rubbing his chest, his face tight with discomfort. "James, are you all right?" I asked, alarm shooting through me. He waved me off. "Just heartburn. Don't fuss." Lorraine, however, wasn't convinced. "Heartburn doesn't make you look like that," she said sharply. "We're calling the doctor tomorrow." James groaned but didn't argue. The next day, I took time off work to go with them. At the clinic, the doctor confirmed high blood pressure and early signs of heart disease. He prescribed medication and strongly recommended lifestyle changes. James tried to brush it off, but Lorraine squeezed his hand tightly. "We're taking this seriously," she told him firmly. On the subway ride home, James looked out the window, quiet. Finally, he said, "I've always been the one to take care of things. Never thought I'd be the one needing care." I reached over and touched his arm gently. "There's no shame in letting people take care of you. You've carried enough for a lifetime. Let us carry some of it now." He glanced at me, his eyes tired but soft. "You're a good woman, Camille." Those words stayed with me long after that day. Around that time, my phone buzzed with another call from Angela. I stared at her name, debating whether to answer. Curiosity got the better of me. "Camille," she began, her voice cooler than before. "We're having a family gathering next month. Everyone's expected to come. I assume you'll be there?" I let out a short laugh. "You assume wrong." Her silence was sharp. "So you're really going to cut yourself off from your family over one misunderstanding?" "One misunderstanding?" I repeated, anger rising. "Angela, I was humiliated at your wedding. Do you remember what your friends said? That I wasn't family?" She exhaled, impatient. "People talk. You shouldn't take it so seriously. It wasn't just talk." I said firmly, "It was truth. At least to them. And you didn't correct it." Angela hesitated, and for the first time, I heard a crack in her voice. "I didn't think it mattered that much." "It did," I replied. "But you don't have to worry. I've already found my family." Before she could respond, I hung up. That evening, when I told James and Lorraine about the call, Lorraine snorted. "The nerve of that girl, acting like she gets to decide who counts as family." James chuckled, shaking his head. "Seems to me you already decided for yourself, and you chose right." Their support gave me strength. As the summer deepened, I started helping Lorraine around the house more, running errands, cleaning, even picking up groceries when her arthritis flared up. She resisted at first, proud as ever, but eventually she admitted, "It's nice having another pair of hands around here." One Saturday, I suggested we host a small barbecue on their building's rooftop. Lorraine loved the idea, and James perked up at the thought of grilling. We invited a few neighbors and friends. Nothing fancy, just good food and laughter. That evening, as the sun set over Harlem, James stood by the grill, flipping chicken while Lorraine fussed over the side dishes. I poured drinks, chatting with the neighbors, feeling for the first time in years like I belonged in a community. At one point, A neighbor leaned over to me and asked, "You James and Lorraine's daughter?" I paused, startled. Lorraine overheard and smiled, sliding an arm around me. "Not by blood," she said proudly. "But she's ours all the same," the neighbor nodded, accepting that without question. And just like that, the words I had longed to hear most of my life had finally been spoken aloud. Later that night, after everyone left, James and I sat on the rooftop, looking out over the city lights. Lorraine had gone downstairs to tidy up, leaving us in the quiet glow of the evening. "You know," James said softly, "I don't say this often, but I'm glad you gave me that gift at the wedding. Not because of the glasses are nice. Sure, but because it brought you to us." I blinked back sudden tears. "I'm glad too, James. More than you know." He patted my hand gently. "Funny how life works. Sometimes rejection is just God's way of pointing you to where you belong." We sat there in silence after that, the hum of the city around us, the bond between us unspoken but unbreakable. And for the first time, I realized that the family I had once begged for didn't matter anymore. Because I had found mine in the Harrises, in their home, in the quiet moments that stitched us together. I didn't need Angela's acceptance. I didn't need anyone's approval. I had love. I had belonging. I had family. And that was enough. By August, the Harrises' apartment felt more like home than my own in Brooklyn. Lorraine even joked about giving me a spare key, though I wasn't sure it was really a joke. I had fallen into their rhythm, helping with groceries, cooking meals, playing dominoes late into the night. It was domestic, simple, and yet it filled a part of me I hadn't realized was starving. But James's health still cast a shadow. He followed the doctor's orders as best he could, took his pills, tried to cut back on salty foods, but the years of hard labor weren't easy to undo. Some days he was his usual sharp, witty self, and other days he seemed drained, his energy flickering like a candle running low. One sticky evening, I arrived to find James sitting on the couch with his feet propped up, looking weary. Lorraine was bustling in the kitchen, her movements sharp with frustration. "Everything okay?" I asked, setting down the bag of fruit I'd brought. Lorraine sighed. "He won't listen. Doctor said rest, but he went and worked a double shift yesterday." James waved a dismissive hand. "They needed me." Short-staffed, I sat beside him, frowning. "James, you can't keep pushing like this. You've done enough for everyone else. It's time to let someone else carry the load." He looked at me then, his eyes tired but proud. "I've been working my whole life, Camille. Don't know how to stop. If I sit too long, I feel useless." I placed my hand on his. "You're not useless. You're loved. That's enough." For a moment, he didn't answer, but the way his hand tightened around mine told me he'd heard me. That weekend, Lorraine asked me to join her at church. It had been years since I stepped inside one, but I agreed. We dressed in our Sunday best and walked to a small Baptist church just a few blocks away. The service was warm, filled with gospel music and the hum of voices singing in unison. As I sat between James and Lorraine, listening to the preacher talk about finding family in unexpected places, I felt a lump rise in my throat. It was as if the words were meant for me. After the service, Lorraine introduced me to several friends from the congregation. One woman, a kind-faced elder named Sister Ruth, smiled and said, "So you're the one James keeps talking about. He says you're like another daughter." I froze, the words striking deep. Before I could respond, Lorraine beamed proudly. "That's right. She's ours." The affirmation hit harder than I expected. I excused myself to the restroom just to gather myself, staring at my reflection in the mirror. For years, I had begged for scraps of recognition from my relatives, and now, without asking, here I was being claimed, chosen, loved. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. A week later, Angela called again. This time, I let it go to voicemail, but her message was sharp and laced with bitterness. "Camille, people are asking about you. You're embarrassing the family. Stop this nonsense and come to the gathering. We can't keep explaining your absence." I listened twice, anger simmering. Embarrassing the family? The same family that had humiliated me? My hand trembled as I deleted the message. When I told Lorraine about it later, she shook her head. "That girl's got a lot of nerve. Don't you let her guilt you, Camille. You owe them nothing. James nodded firmly. They only want you there so they can look good, not because they care. Their words steadied me. Still, the hurt lingered. I wanted to shout at Angela, to ask why she couldn't just admit what she had done. But then I thought about Lorraine's hug, James's laughter, Sister Ruth calling me their daughter, and I realized I didn't need Angela's validation anymore. One evening, while helping Lorraine in the kitchen, I asked her something that had been on my mind. Do you ever feel resentful? I said carefully, that your own kids live so far away that they don't call as much. Lorraine paused, her knife hovering over the cutting board. Then she sighed. Sometimes, yes. I'd be lying if I said it didn't hurt. But I also know they're living their lives, raising their families. We did our job. Now it's their turn. She glanced at me, her eyes kind. And besides, God sent us you. I think that was his way of filling the gap. Her words nearly undid me. I blinked quickly, trying not to cry into the onions I was chopping. As summer wound down, I spent more time with them than ever. I even started staying over on weekends, sleeping on their couch when it got too late to head home. It became so natural that neighbors began treating me as part of the household. No one questioned it. One Saturday evening, as the three of us sat on the balcony watching the sunset, James turned to me and said, Camille, I want you to promise me something, anything. I said, if something happens to me, don't let Lorraine carry it all alone. Promise me you'll be here. I swallowed hard, my chest tightening. Nothing's going to happen to you, James. He gave a small, weary smile. Promise me anyway. I reached over, clasping his hand. I promise. Lorraine reached out and covered both our hands with hers. Don't talk like that, she whispered, her voice breaking. The three of us sat there, hands intertwined, the weight of unspoken fears pressing down. But beneath it all was love, fierce and steady. That night, as I lay awake on their couch, I thought about everything that had led me here. The wedding, the humiliation, the gift. I had walked into that hotel believing I had no family. And somehow, by the end of the night, I had found the only family that mattered. The irony wasn't lost on me, but life had taught me one thing. Nothing stays still. And I knew, deep down, that more challenges were coming. I just prayed we'd face them together. September brought cooler nights, but the heaviness in the air at the Harris's apartment wasn't from the weather. James had another doctor's appointment, and the news wasn't good. His blood pressure had stabilized some, but the doctor warned of strain on his heart. He needed to slow down more, maybe even stop working altogether. James sat stiffly in the exam room, his jaw clenched as the doctor spoke. Lorraine held his hand, nodding firmly, but I could see the storm brewing in James's eyes. When we left the clinic, he barely spoke. On the subway ride back to Harlem, he sat staring out the window, shoulders slumped, silent in a way I had never seen before. That evening, after dinner, I found him sitting alone on the balcony, staring into the night. I joined him quietly, not wanting to push. After a long silence, he finally said, all my life, I've worked every day since I was 16, and now they're telling me to stop. Like it's that easy. I swallowed. It's not about stopping, James. It's about living. You deserve more years with Lorraine. With me. He let out a bitter laugh. But if I stop, who am I? What's left of me if I'm not working? I thought carefully before answering. You're a husband, a father, a friend. That's who you are. None of that goes away if you stop sweeping floors. He didn't reply. But after a while, his shoulders softened. The next week, he agreed to cut back his hours to part-time. It wasn't easy for him, but Lorraine and I praised him for it, reminding him every day that he was worth more than the work he did. But change never comes without resistance. One Sunday afternoon, Angela called again. Against my better judgment, I answered. Camille, she began. Her tone clipped. Word's gotten back to me that you've been spending all your time with some janitor and his wife. My blood ran hot. Excuse me. You heard me, she said sharply. People are talking. They think it's strange that you've cut off your real family just to play house with strangers. I took a deep breath, gripping the phone tightly. Angela, those strangers treat me better than anyone in our blood family ever has. They see me. They love me. And that makes them more family than you'll ever be. There was a pause, then a scoff. You're embarrassing yourself, Camille. One day, you'll regret this. No, I said firmly. The only regret I have is wasting so many years trying to fit into a family that never wanted me. I hung up before she could respond. My hands trembled, but I felt lighter, freer. When I told James and Lorraine about the call, Lorraine rolled her eyes. That girl's poison. Don't let her near you, James chuckled softly. Funny thing about family, they think they own you. Truth is, family is borrowed, Camille. We borrow each other's time, each other's hearts. Blood don't mean nothing if the love isn't there. His words sank deep, but even as I built a life with the Harrises, I couldn't shake a quiet fear. James's health was fragile, and though he tried to hide it, I saw the way fatigue crept into his body. One evening, as we were playing dominoes, he suddenly pressed a hand to his chest, grimacing. James, Lorraine said quickly, panic in her voice. He waved her off, forcing a smile. Just indigestion. But I didn't believe him. That night, after Lorraine went to bed, I found him on the balcony again, looking worn. James, I said gently, don't lie to us. We can see when you're struggling. He sighed, his face heavy. I just don't want you to worrying all the time. I want to be strong for you. I sat beside him, close enough that our shoulders touched. You don't have to be strong all the time. Let us worry. Let us carry it with you. For a long moment, he was quiet. Then he whispered, you really are like a daughter to me, Camille. The words hit me like a tidal wave. My eyes burned with tears, but I held them back, not wanting to break the moment. And you're like a father to me, I said softly. He smiled faintly, and for once, he let himself lean against me. Just a little, as though allowing me to hold some of his weight. The following week, I decided to do something special. With Lorraine's help, I organized a small surprise gathering at their apartment, just a few neighbors and church friends, nothing extravagant. We decorated the living room with balloons, cooked James's favorite dishes, and baked a cake. When he walked in and saw everyone gathered, his eyes widened in shock. What's all this? He asked, his voice caught between laughter and disbelief. It's for you, I said, to celebrate you. Not for working, not for providing, just for being you. For the first time, I saw tears well in James's eyes. He blinked quickly, trying to hide them, but Lorraine caught his hand and squeezed it. That night, as people sang and laughed around him, James looked happier than I had ever seen him. He sat at the center of it all, his face glowing, his laughter full. Later, when the guests had gone and the apartment was quiet, he turned to me and said, Camille, you didn't have to do all this. Yes, I did, I said firmly. Because you deserve to be celebrated, James. You always have. He stared at me for a moment, then nodded slowly, his eyes shining. Thank you, daughter. I couldn't hold back the tears then. Lorraine pulled us both into her arms, and we stayed like that for a long while, wrapped in a love that was real, chosen, and unshakable. And in that moment, I knew, no matter what came next, no matter how much time we had, I would never be alone again. The leaves had just begun to turn when everything came to a head. Autumn in Harlem was always beautiful, the trees lining the streets glowing in shades of gold and crimson, kids crunching through fallen leaves on their way to school. But for me, that season will always be marked by what happened with James. It was late October, a chilly evening. I had stopped by after work with a pot of chicken soup I had made, knowing James hadn't been feeling well. When I walked in, Lorraine was pacing the living room, her face pale. He's in the bedroom, she said quickly. He's been short of breath all day. I dropped my bag and rushed to the back room. James was sitting on the edge of the bed, his skin clammy, his breathing shallow. James, I said softly, kneeling beside him. We need to get you to the hospital. He shook his head weakly. Just tired. Lorraine appeared behind me, her voice sharp with fear. No, James, enough of that. We're going. We called an ambulance, and within minutes, the small apartment was filled with the sound of paramedics moving quickly, strapping him onto a stretcher. Lorraine gripped his hand the entire time, whispering prayers under her breath. I followed them, my heart pounding as the sirens wailed through the city streets. At the hospital, They admitted him for observation. The diagnosis was congestive heart failure. The doctor explained that while medication could help, James needed to drastically change his lifestyle. Lorraine sat quietly, holding back tears. James just stared at the floor, his pride wounded. That night, I stayed with them in the hospital room. I pulled up a chair and held James's hand while Lorraine dozed in the corner. He looked at me with tired eyes. "Camille," he said softly, "I don't want you wasting your life worrying about me." "You're not a waste," I replied firmly. "You're family, and family doesn't walk away when things get hard." He squeezed my hand weakly, his lips curving into a faint smile. "I'm glad you walked into my life. I'm glad you let me stay," I whispered. James stayed in the hospital for nearly a week. During that time, I helped Lorraine with everything: meals, errands, even dealing with the insurance paperwork that left her overwhelmed. It was exhausting, but I didn't mind. It felt like the least I could do. When James finally came home, he was weaker, but his spirit hadn't dimmed. The first evening back, as we sat around the table eating soup, he said, "You know, this old body might be slowing down, but my heart's full." "That's more than I could ask for." Lorraine smiled, her hand resting on his. "We'll take it one day at a time," and we did. But life has a cruel way of reminding you how fragile everything is. One afternoon in November, as I was at work, my phone rang. It was Lorraine, her voice trembling. "Camille, it's James. He collapsed. They've taken him to the hospital." I rushed out without a second thought, my heart racing as I made my way through the city. When I arrived, Lorraine was in the waiting room, her eyes red from crying. "They're trying," she whispered. Hours passed in a blur of doctors and nurses. Finally, a physician came out, his expression grim. James had passed away. I felt the world tilt beneath me. Lorraine let out a broken sob, and I wrapped my arms around her, holding her as tightly as I could. My own tears fell freely, but in that moment, I focused on her, on keeping her from collapsing under the weight of it all. The days that followed were heavy. Lorraine and I planned the funeral together, each detail feeling surreal. Neighbors and church members rallied around us, offering food, prayers, and comfort. Angela called once, offering hollow condolences, but I declined to speak with her. She hadn't been there when James was alive. She didn't deserve to insert herself now. The funeral was simple but beautiful. The church was filled with people whose lives James had touched: co-workers, neighbors, friends. As I stood to speak, my hands trembled, but my voice was steady. James Harris came into my life when I least expected it. At a time when I felt invisible, he saw me. And he didn't just see me, he made me family. He taught me that love isn't about blood, but about choice, about loyalty, about showing up for each other. I will carry his lessons with me for the rest of my life. I glanced at Lorraine, who nodded through her tears. I may not share his last name, but James Harris was my father in every way that mattered, and I will honor him by being here for Lorraine, the way he asked me to. By the time I stepped down, tears were streaming down my face, but I felt a strange peace. After the burial, as the crowd slowly dispersed, Lorraine and I stood together by the graveside. The autumn wind was sharp, carrying with it the scent of fallen leaves. "He loved you like his own," Lorraine whispered. "And I loved him the same," I said, my voice breaking. She turned to me then, gripping my hand tightly. "We'll get through this, Camille. Together." I nodded, knowing it was true. In the weeks that followed, I spent nearly every day with Lorraine. We leaned on each other, filling the silence with shared meals, old stories, and quiet companionship. Grief lingered, but so did love, wrapping around us like a shield. Angela called once more, this time more insistent. "Camille," she said, "the family is asking why you're so involved. People are saying it's strange how close you were to him." "He wasn't even." I cut her off sharply. "Don't finish that sentence. James Harris was more family to me than you'll ever be. And if you can't respect that, then don't call me again." And with that, I ended the call. The truth was, I didn't need Angela's approval anymore. I didn't need any of them. I had found what I had searched for all my life: belonging, love, family. And though James was gone, he had left me with a gift more valuable than any wedding crystal could ever be. As winter settled over New York, I stayed close to Lorraine. Together, we built a new rhythm, carrying James's memory with us in every laugh, every shared meal, every quiet moment. And sometimes when the city was still and the night air was cool, I would look up at the sky and whisper, "Thank you, James, for choosing me," because in the end, that was what mattered most, not the rejection, not the humiliation, not the pain. What mattered was that I had been chosen, and I would spend the rest of my life honoring that choice.